Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, happy days are here again, and understanding a question is half an answer, and this is Half the Answer with your hosts, Trent R. Nelson and Caitlin M. Green. And, well, you know what we do here? We're asking questions, trying to organize thoughts into coherency. Well, Caitlin, who do we have today who is coming to hang out with us and teach us a whole bunch of cool stuff?
I have brought you another amazing gift, Trent. I do not stop. It is great. I am here with Aris Clemons. Aris Moreno Clemons is an assistant professor of Hispanic linguistics in the Modern Foreign Languages and Literatures Department at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her work spans the fields of linguistics, education, anthropology, and Black and Latinx studies. And her work investigates the intersections of language, race, and identity. Aris, I'm so happy to see you.
I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
Oh my gosh. I think I am just very lucky to be able to claim Aris as a colleague. We both have chapters in a recent book about inclusion and decolonization in linguistics. It's a two-parter. It is a banger. Every page slaps.
Yes.
But Aris's chapter in particular, we were assigned yours for peer review and you ours, I think, right? It was a good time.
Yeah.
And your chapter was called Apolitical Linguistics Doesn't Exist and It Shouldn't. And it's one piece in like I think a larger research focus of yours that I'm also really interested in, which is the idea of like, what are ideologies that we have about the way research works, the way academia works, and the way universities work. So I think it's something that, people don't have a lot of clarity on when they're not actively working in a university, and sometimes when they are working in a university.
Yeah.
I think it's good to talk about.
This is also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say that the work is ideologies in general, right? Like how we are constructing ideologies through language is, the larger.
This gets to one of my big obsessions, which is like, can we stop the ideology slander, right? Like ideology is a person's belief about how the world works, right? And it has to do with the way that we are enculturated in our immediate context, and it also has like, we are creating our ideology all the time through our actions and through our speech. And it is just a part of being a person. Like, you can't be a person who's ideology free.
Right.
You would have to like live in a small white box and never talk to anyone. And even then your ideology would be like, box is home. Like, that would be an ideology.
Right.
Exactly. I was like, why does the box have to be white? No, I'm joking.
No, really, come on now. Who put me in the box? We were watching a TV show where like the show had been trucking along for a while, and then suddenly the idea that there might be like other people like became a concept, and I was like, oh, well, like that's an ideology shift for them, right? That's like a whole paradigm shift where the characters used to be like, this is my world, and then they found out there's another world. Like, it's everywhere. Ideology is just part of being a person.
And it's really interesting to think about that in just like the development of modernity or like society or things like that, right? So imagine that television show where you're like, okay, this is my whole world, and then somebody's like, oh, here's a book about another world that maybe you didn't see, but now you read about. Oh, now here's the internet. Now you can see these other worlds, right? Like it just it's exponential, if you will. Ideology is and the structures of it have gotten more and more complex, right?
Right. The allegory of the white box almost kind of fits with the newest obsession in my house, which is Severance. I don't know if you've watched the show, but I have my Severance mug here. It's my hang in there.
Oh my God, I love it.
Yes.
I love it. I have not watched it. I am saving it for a vacation where I can just binge through it.
Smart.
Well, it explores themes of what does it mean to be like your most basic self or like yourself minus all the influences of the outside world. And then as the characters keep getting introduced to new information, like how does that impact things? And the show itself has a very clear thesis about like what your deepest, truest self is. And it's easy to miss if you are not thinking about the fact that everyone who speaks to you, including showrunners and show writers, have a perspective, right?
Right.
And that
Of
ties
course.
back to science as well. People who are doing science have a perspective. People who are doing research have a perspective, right?
A
And so
hundred
that's what I
percent.
love about your work so much. So can you tell me a little bit about the research that you have been doing lately?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on a couple of projects, and I will say that I've been spending a good portion of my time on what we like to call in the biz service to the field. So I am in the process of starting two distinct journals, academic journals, one of which has affiliation to some scholarly organizations as well as publication venues, and another of which has no affiliation to anyone and is radical in all of its forms of thinking about how we conduct this work, who we're getting our ideas from, the formats that it's coming in. And so accepting empirical research in multimodal fashion, so video articles, if you will, as
Right.
opposed to just articles, things that are written by students or community members. Folks get to choose whether they want to have their affiliation associated with their articles or not, and the review process is completely changed to a mentor and conversation um, kind of structure where we're having our peers or our scholarly kind of experts engage with our authors in order to kind of question through making more kind of, I guess, highly rigorous production, right? Whether we see it in different forms.
Sure.
So that's partially what I'm working on, trying to get our messages out in formats that will reach larger audiences. And something that I always say when I talk about this work, I think we as academics just need to do a better job of making what seems like common knowledge to us accessible to wider publics. So
Right.
as linguists, we think that all language is equal in its ability to communicate messages or for human communication. However, through like historical situations and the construction of ideologies around language, there's these ideas that some languages are harder than others. So let's say Chinese is harder to learn than English or Spanish. Some languages are more beautiful than others, like Italian is a beautiful language as opposed to maybe we're thinking Zulu or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and so a lot of my work deals with kind of deconstructing how those ideologies are formed, what historical and social kind of situations were ripe for the construction of these ideologies, both about language, but also about the humans who use that language. So I'm currently writing a book called U.S. Black Vernacular Spanishes,
Nice.
Transnationalism and Race Making,
Yes.
and it is a book about 50 years of research that talked about the construction of uh, Chicano or Mexican English or Latino English that said that a bunch of people shared neighborhoods with African Americans, and so they acquired a bunch of African American language as they were acquiring English, and not one person said, did the African Americans also acquire Spanish from being in that same area as those other folks? And I was like, well, I did, right? And
Right.
so I've found that this large group of African Americans who do speak Spanish because of these contexts and have had other classroom contexts. But also, as I was doing this research, I realized that it had to do with like a larger ideological erasure of the existence of Black speakers of Spanish, even though we know if we study history that during the transatlantic slave trade, only 4% of those that were transported ended up in the United States. And that means the rest
Yeah.
of
Sure.
those millions of people ended up in
Long
Latin
live.
America,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah,
Sure.
across
it's
us, right?
logical, but we don't think about it. We love to put things into buckets, like
Right.
conceptually, right? So we
Yes.
like to be, as white Americans, we're just like, well, there's black people and then there's Spanish speakers, and then that's the two kinds of not me people. It's like,
Right.
well,
And
not really.
also African Americans, right? In general, we're like, wait a minute, there's black people in other places.
Right.
Yeah, I was super embarrassed actually in grad school to have my mind blown that there was a particular like US Spanish dialect that somebody in the Spanish linguistics department was studying, that I was like, I'm from the Southwest. Like that should have been obvious to me.
Right? You're like from where it's from, like US Spanish.
Like
Right.
obviously the Spanish that I was hearing is not like the exact same kind of Spanish that I would hear in Mexico City. Like obviously. And yet I'm watching this presentation being like, "Oh, those are distinct linguistic features."
And it's but the ideologies are so strong. So we find ourselves leaving an applied linguistics conference, and in the taxi ride, because we're speaking Spanish with each other, me and my colleagues who are all in a Spanish department, the driver, who I imagine is somebody that is Afro descended
Mhm.
and from a place in Latin America that has a large percentage of Afro descended places. We're in Colorado, and he's like, oh, but they speak Spanish so bad here because they mix English words in. And when you mix English words in, it's so bad. And, our linguist brains are like, zing, zing, like, no,
Is it is it bad? That's
that's
so
not
funny.
the
I
way
know.
it is.
We're constantly hearing people be like, the language is different there, so that's terrible. And then we just have to be like, but what if it's just different? What
What
if
if it's just different? Yeah.
But why can't the differences in all of our ways of communicating, why cannot they all have beauty with them
right?
and all have these features which we end up finding to be romantic insofar as we find different ways of saying the same language because of those languages that have sort of mixed, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
get
I
we
mean, I find the beauty in it. I think those of us who intrinsically find the beauty become linguists, but but those, and then we use that our superpowers as linguists to try to get other folks to be like, hey, the messaging around whether something is good or bad has nothing to do with the actual language practices and everything to do with how we were educated, how we were socialized,
Yeah.
what we've seen, what we haven't seen, right?
It seems like this, and I know less than either of you, of course, but it seems as though this sort of concept of homogeneous language is, it has to be new. It has to be a relatively new innovation because for all of existence, everything was so regional that you would only have dialects of any type of language.
How isn't it quite hilarious that a place that came to be from breaking off from England
Right.
has decided that monolingualism is the thing that we wanted to normalize, right?
Yeah.
In a place
Right.
that come from a tiny island by which I have never seen people claim more regional difference in their dialect of one English.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
people say all the time, like, let me hear a British person talk for like 5 seconds and I'll tell you what street they were born on. Like they have such a strong idea of linguistic
Right.
diversity that like, yeah, for that's very silly. Also, wasn't England, first of all, like colonized by various different Germanic tribes? Like, wouldn't you think?
And
And then
French ones, which is why,
and
Absolutely.
the
and
French
all these
people.
other ones, which is why there's so many words from all of these different
Right.
languages to
Yes.
create English, right? Structures
Absolutely.
like Greek and random things as
Right.
well. Yeah.
One thing that is always quite surprising, I think, to people is knowing that what we call monolingual ideology, right? The belief that like the natural state of a person is to know just one language is actually like fairly in the minority in the world.
In the
Sure.
world, right? And for me, it's quite like it shows quite clearly the ways that it's connected to the creation of power structures as
Right.
opposed to something that's natural, right? So if we're going to come from a place this also reminds me of how race is created in the United States. But if we're coming from a place that has such linguistic diversity, the idea that we would create a situation where there's like a standard or just one way of speaking, and it not be connected to how we're trying to make people behave
Yeah.
seems
Right.
wild to me, right?
And then that's like before you think about how just geographically huge this country is. Like
And
there's
it's
just
why
so
people
much.
can't imagine how big it is, right? When people are like, I'm like, I love this all the time. I'm from California, from the Bay Area, and people would be like, I'm coming to see you. I'm coming to California. I'd be like, where are you going? And they'd be like, LA. And I'd be like, well, that's 8 hours away. The same thing happens to me here in Tennessee. They'll be like, I'm going to Memphis. I'm like, great. I live in Knoxville on the other side of the state. I'll see you
Right.
in 10 hours.
That happened to me all the time. And like, living in Phoenix, Arizona, I lived closer to LA than you lived to
Yeah.
LA.
I think that the nation state has sort of allowed for us to conceive of language to be more homogenous because, I mean, as you both noted, across the United States, it could not be anywhere near homogenous. You go to Russia, and they're speaking like 60 languages. They have all of these very indigenous mixtures. And the same thing in China. You have this broad, beautiful diversity of language. And how could you not with just all these clusters of regional dialect combining?
Yeah, and need, right?
Right.
We need to have these kind of regionalisms, right? Because there are things that happen here in Appalachia that don't happen in other parts of the country, right? We need to tell you
Right.
about that mountain.
Right.
So
Right. Go rock your top.
we talked about ideology slander. We're going to stop it. Let's now go to identity slander because one of the main elements of how you speak is who you think you are, right? And who you think you belong to. And so that's my like non-academic way of explaining it, right? Like,
Love
here's
that.
what an identity is. It's, and it's expressed in so many different ways, one of which is the language variety or the dialect that you are using at any given time. And so, like in Appalachia, you want to be able to speak in a way that reflects that you belong to the people of Appalachia and the
Right.
place. And
And I'll tell you, the amount of y'all that I throw out while I'm here,
Mhm.
quite
Is it
different than
more
when I'm
or
in
less than when
California.
you're away? Because so I personally, I'm a very sort of mainstream American speaker, a white, very white sounding lady due to my whiteness, and also um, but I have this mom, right? And she is from England and she grew up in England and Australia. And I have always loved trying to track sort of how English and how Australian she sounds at any given time, because in different moments, even as we're traversing different contexts in the US, she is like that part of her is made more relevant, right? It's like brought to the forefront of her mind in different cases. And so, like, if she hears an accent that sounds British to her, she gets more British, easy. But then
Right.
also, like, if you remind her of something she used to do as a teenager, she gets more Australian sounding.
Yes.
Really?
So, like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, because our language is
yeah.
connected
So,
to emotions as well, right?
Right.
It's like my mother's
both
English kind of flies
very,
out the window when she's angry. Like, what is this English stuff, right?
Well,
Like,
so
yeah.
that I really identify with this whole discussion because my mother's side of the family is also English, but my dad's side of the family is from a very small town in Minnesota. And so I routinely find myself like having this strange mixture of like Minnesota country and also like you have to speak properly otherwise grandma is going to kick your ass, and so and but people notice it as well.
did grandma express what properly was before
Yeah,
she
right.
decided?
Did she give you parameters?
Oh yes, she is a proper English woman. She was a head girl and the prefect, and oh yes,
Wow.
yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
it
this
was
is so great for me because this brings up one of the things that I talk about a lot when people are thinking about monolingualism or literally like the homogenization of how we speak. I'm like, human beings have agency. And because we have agency is removed when we remove differences, right? So because we have agency, we kind of get to we get to make choices about how we're performing ourselves. So you got to make a choice to voice your grandmother in that particular way because that's how she presents herself. And you could choose that's who Trent is right now, right? And you could move through the world using that. People would probably be like, "Hey, Trent, that's a little weird," but but you can make that decision, right? And
Right.
us linguists have this thing that we got from one of our scholar heroes, William Labov, who we just lost, called covert versus overt prestige, right? And so the covert prestige is that I get to be myself and I get to align myself with people who I think are like me by speaking in a particular way, whether that is accepted by the larger society or not.
Right.
And overt prestige is me choosing to use the language that is accepted by the larger society to present myself as proper or
Right.
educated or professional or all of the things that we're supposed to want to be as good citizens, right?
Right. The homogenous part of ourselves instead of the sort of,
The personal.
So yes,
yeah.
we are part of the bigger group instead of
Yeah.
yes, I am
Yeah.
myself as a human being and an individual.
Right. Well, the ideal is in many ways having those two somehow align to where
They do. They do for the dominant class. They align very well
classic.
for the
Yeah.
they
Well,
align right on up. They are
well,
they are one of one for those who represent the dominant class.
well, I'm
I
gonna.
think out of the three of us, that's just me, really, because Trent, you're like you have a fairly regional, like people love hearing your accent
I
so
do.
much.
I'm enjoying it right now.
And yeah, because I grew up in one of those places where they say you have no accent because we are like we have the most kind of prestigious like normal sounding American English. Like yeah, I think mostly except for my sin of being female, I pretty much uh have like the overt prestige as just my natural self.
Right? Like,
I
and that's impressive.
got that second X chromosome. Dang it.
Oh, that's
I was just
incredible.
greedy, I guess. I needed two.
Yeah, and so I will note that sometimes, luckily you don't have that Y chromosome because then you would be part of a class that might not be able to recognize that that you speak the dominant language.
Right.
Um, it is more difficult to recognize that there may be differences, and those differences are natural if your language has been naturalized as the norm, as the standard that everybody should be moving towards. You're like, wait a
Right.
minute, but it's natural. I speak this way, right? It would be harder. It's easier for you to understand that that is not natural when you have to work to reach that kind of dialect or that
See,
kind of
nobody ever told me that my language was natural. They must have told Caitlin all the time, but they never
Well,
said that
they
I
literally
sounded.
they told us we didn't have an accent. Like we got told by adults that we didn't have an accent at school. And I was like, cool, sounds like a fact. Thank you. And then I went to school later and was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense.
And I went to school in Southern California, but there was like Valley Girl Speak, like
Yep.
we do that a lot. And they were like, and I was in communications and public relations, and they told us we wanted to lose our accents or speak like you don't have an accent. So we had to move towards that standard or you don't have an
That's
accent dialect.
So this is where we can get into the concept of markedness, right? Because if you think there's like a normal default way and then everything else is like extras on top, that's how you get to a place where you talk about losing your accent, right?
Right.
Because people who have regionalized or racialized or otherwise kind of othered language varieties get told you gotta lose your accent, you gotta like sand off the sort of uneven parts, the rough parts, like all of these ideas where the metaphor, the image that's getting put in your head is that there's like some kind of pearl in the middle that's like the core true language. And you need to take off all that extra stuff you're doing and you'll get to the real good language.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say as a a proud speaker of a non-standard variety of English and Spanish, for that matter, and many of the other languages that I speak. Um, I truly don't believe that it's possible to get rid of those parts of yourself. Um, Not only because of that covert prestige of like, this allows me to have authenticity within my smaller groups, but also because it's always in there dynamically. So even if you try to lose it completely, it never fully goes away, right? Because of that in kind of impossibility to lose it, what it means that we're gaining by getting those messages is an idea of where and when we can use our language and with who and what are the consequences of doing that, right? So I think about this all the time as the speaker of Black English. If I speak it in a particular context, people may look at me and say she's ignorant or she's, not that smart. Though I can see it pop up in a TikTok trend, and
Right.
then it is all of a sudden cool or youth or young or something to sell chocolates at the Super Bowl. I don't know, things like that.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, we love to take linguistic elements, like just a little piece off of a covert prestige variety, and like just that, and throw away the person that created
Yeah.
it
So I
and
think about
play with
markedness, which is the idea that this feature is like connected and it like stands out a lot to people's ears. So if my face says I be going to the park, that B stands out a lot. But then I think about market and their desire,
it. Nice.
right? And so if I'm trying to sell a Toyota Scion to African Americans, the folks in the commercial might not be in this body, but might use the language of,
Mhm.
oh, I be going shopping in my Scion all the time. We
Right.
hear it all the time, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I hate that. I mean, I don't watch TV very much, but like that is like I do not need to hear some type of fictionalized like American Spanish, like because you're trying to sell McDonald's to Spanish people, and like I find it offensive, like to some degree. Like, man, I don't know if I should or if I'm just being overly sensitive, but because I guess that like random white folks get it as well, where they're like, "Hey, John, like gonna go grab like a Toyota Corolla today, right?" And I guess like that's the
Hey,
same
buddy.
thing, right? Like who invited this guy, right? Like,
Right? You're like, this is not my
Right
friend.
away,
I
this is
cannot talk to John. Like,
yeah. I think it's totally reasonable because it's something that you think of as being a very human thing. It, like, having the ability to use your language to do your identity work and be who you are, and that being used to sell feels dirty, right? And
right.
it feels like manipulation, and it feels like that because of the way that it is.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I would feel more comfortable with it if they like even talk to anybody from the actual community so that they could get it, I don't know, close to right.
One thing
Right?
about being a language user is, like, you're an expert in how that language works, and so then when you hear somebody try to replicate it, you can immediately pick out the ways that it didn't hit the mark, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I
Right.
think once you hear somebody, like, do an imperfect version of, like, a Black dialect of English or Spanish, or anything that has, like, sort of covert prestige that they're trying to use to sell something, it gets real gross feeling really fast because you're like, "Ah, you didn't even do it right."
Yeah, which is interesting because my book is talking about, a whole group of people who technically don't like belong to the particular dialects that they're speaking. So I'm thinking through the artistic or discography of a rapper named D Smoke. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of D Smoke. He won a Netflix produced hip hop competition that was like, American Idol, but hip hop style.
Right. Yeah.
And he won this because he's African American from Inglewood, California, but every single song he switches and raps fluently in Spanish. And it is a particular Spanish. It is a Chicano from his neighborhood, probably his block Spanish, right?
Yeah.
right? And because he has participated since childhood in that community, it is read as hyper authentic. So even though he doesn't, possess the like, they're not, they can't be like, oh, well, that's just some random black guy speaking Spanish because it's so authentic, rightly part of what
He's
he's
speaking
doing. And
Spanish.
so even using your language authentically may break from the ideologies about who is supposed to own particular language features, which is also why it feels dirty or offensive, Trent, when we hear it.
Right, when we
Mhm.
feel like it's legitimate to some degree, when we feel like
Mhm.
we could know it ourselves, or
Mhm.
that we might, that it really seems to be
Mhm.
sincere, right? A real desire to not utilize this thing for gain, but to utilize it for the sake of itself, for the beauty of it, for the functionality of it, right? For the community that speaks it together. um, that seems
Right.
that but you know commercialism and capitalism, I don't know if it can do that. I don't know if it can do
Can we delve
that.
into capitalism?
I think
Listen,
always.
Are we,
Yeah,
yeah,
are we there yet? How long have we been recording for?
I think we earned it. Yeah, we can talk about
As a
capitalism for
treat. Yeah, it's thinking about language as a tool to do something, to produce something for the system, for capital, as opposed to language as a tool of communication for human needs, right? For humans as social beings, as biological and social beings who need to create these kind of human alliances between each other, right?
Now, it sounds to me, Eris, like you're telling me that language can't really be analyzed as just like an idealized clinical form, and that it has to be considered in the context and the purpose for which it was made. That's
Yeah,
just annoying.
all the way to the body that produced it. Like it literally has to be considered at all of these different angles. And sometimes in community, if you do it, yeah, sometimes it needs to be considered from different perspectives, right? And so we should be doing that together, not by ourselves, which often
Yeah.
happens as academics
Okay,
as well.
so let's see. Ideology slander handled. Identity slander dealt with. Let's talk about like lived experience slander.
Mm.
Because to me,
Whew.
one of the ways that people talk down about the humanities and about like woke research, they call it like me search or whatever, and
Yeah.
you know, and I learned it as autoethnography, and I learned
Yes.
that autoethnography is a really useful tool actually, because one of the ways that you can expand the body of research that exists is to take a look at what's there already and say, have I lived a life that fits with the descriptions that I see before me in the canon now? Or can I add a data point? And to me, like the idea of looking at your own life, describing things that have happened to you, writing down the things that have been said and done around you are data points. That is observation. That's a legitimate form of getting
Science.
information. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox now. I'm
Yes,
freaking mad.
an observation is science, right? Like that's what science is. It's observing data points, right?
So people who are like, "Oh, science is all messed up," it's because they are imagining that you have to be like at a table with a beaker and like doing one single experiment with just one little change, and that is not all that science is actually.
I'm going to bring up irony, the irony in not the Alanis Morissette way, irony in the real ironic way, which is uh, the fact that knowledge, as we currently understand it, was literally performed by a set of people who were like in their little white boxes and
Yeah.
only considering their own experiences, right? It's knowledge has literally been created on me search, on folks
Yeah.
literally just looking at things in their own context. And so the idea that now that is all of a sudden woke or liberal or something like that
Yeah.
is wild. And instead of thinking about autoethnography in the ways that you're talking about as multiple datas in a larger set as we are on the journey of
Yeah.
figuring out what's what, because there's no way to know the truth, right? There are many, 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 many ways. Um, instead of thinking about that, then the individuals who are participating that are villainized for other reasons that have to do with capitalism.
There is this sort of, I think, subconscious desire in so many for absolutes, right? An absolute
Right.
language, one language,
Mhm.
absolutely. Science
Yeah.
is conceived as being less powerful than faith, I believe, because faith has that
Mhm.
absolutism to it,
Mhm.
right? God can
Mhm.
be the same way forever, right? And if you're Aristotle, God doesn't even have to do anything, right? Um, but but life as we know it, as everyone is alluding to, right, is not absolute. It's constantly
Right.
changing. It's constantly contextual. Language is contextual. The perceptions are contextual. uh,
And we're actually we're seeing the dangers of even constructing your world in these absolutes. It's We're seeing the inability to kind of deal with life as it comes at you. I think about this as a person who is has recently hit menopause, and I'm like, man, I feel like people should have been talking about this like all the time, and nobody is talking about this, right? Like these full on shifts in the way that my brain and body works and all of those kinds of things. And because we want these absolutes, we're just like, okay, this is youth. Like, this
Yeah.
is what life is. And we are not able to handle things as they come to us because we're like, this is the box that we're supposed to
Oh,
be living in.
we have so much in common on that front because, like, you just are dealing with menopause, and I have, like, recently exited the postpartum phase of my life,
Oof,
and so and that's another one where I'm like, "Where was the information, please?" About because 'cause they're like, "Here's everything you need to know about, like, being pregnant and giving birth," and then, like, "Bye.
right.
Good luck."
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And so it's dangerous for so many reasons. And then also the danger of like, be, I only see this way, and so I can't even imagine that there's a possibility that somebody could see something a different way or experience it a different way, which always rocks my world because I'm like, have you never like read a book or watched a TV show and like felt like, oh well, I clearly am not, Superman, or you know,
Well, there was just a whole thing on Blue Sky actually, I think it happened on Twitter, but people were talking about it on Blue Sky, which is where I am. But like it turns out a lot of people are reading books and watching movies and not really getting like what's in it, right? So like we had a USA Today opinion about a lady who was like, I love White Lotus because finally as a Republican woman, I am reassured that I'm not weird because I'm like a character on White Lotus. A show that's exclusively about weirdos.
into it.
Yeah,
Into it. There's all kinds of craziness on that show too.
yeah, yeah, and she's like, "No, I'm just like" I think it was, like, Jane is the character who's a white Republican lady.
That is great because that is, as a person who is not part of that community, I watch that and I wonder about the authenticity of it. And then somebody from that community tells me, right? This is why we should just rely on the people from those communities to tell us about the truth of the narrative surrounding them, right? So when Black people are like, no, no, we're not like that, you should probably listen to us.
And then the other thing that happened on Twitter was somebody was like, "Oh, name me one piece of good art that a right winger's ever made," and then a person made a list, and it was the most like weird list I've ever seen. It included The Matrix, which was made by two trans sisters. So I'm
I
not really
thought so. I was like, wait a minute.
allegory, but okay, right wingers, sure, right. And like, they put stuff in like the Lord of the Rings, and it's like, well, like it's kind of like a Jesus allegory, like you could like get there, right? It has some like racial essentialism stuff in there, maybe like okay, but then like yeah, the Matrix, and then they had a whole conversation. This always happens about Starship Troopers, where they're like,
Hmm.
oh, because the book is fascist, but the movie is a parody. So you
Exactly.
so people would be like someone was like, "Well, the book maybe, but not the movie," and then a bunch of people come in like, "No, the movie too." Like, okay, so you're watching them, but you're not like taking them
You're
in.
not
Like,
get taken a minute, or they just literally don't understand the genre of parody.
yeah, they're like, "Yeah, kill the bugs, damn it!" Like,
Right.
okay,
Which is something I feel like we have to deal with as a society, right? Like we have to deal with the fact that we're going to engage things that are coming to us differently, right? But when the results of that are whole scale, like disenfranchisement of human beings or, violation of human rights, these are when these questions start to be like, hey guys.
Yeah. All right, I want to talk about the concept of other ways of knowing because I think people are very confused about what this is. One of my favorite guys, by which I mean least favorite guys, is a professor from Canada. His name is Gad Sad. It's not Peterson. It's Gad Sad. So anyway, he has a real thing about other ways of knowing and how much he hates it, and he likes to tweet about it all the time. And so an example that I found recently was from September, where he won't link to it because if you clicked on it, like it would immediately debunk itself, right? But he's like, "Oh my God, a major research Canadian university," and then he quotes them as referencing the concept of other ways of knowing. And so when he says from a major research Canadian university, we are embracing new ways of knowing, ways of doing, ways of connecting, and ways of being. Um, what he implies is that like now you can't do anything at that university that isn't like
New.
already an indigenous practice or something, right? But that is absolutely not what they were saying. And so when I went and looked up where that quote was from, it is from the Indigenous Studies program at University of Calgary.
It's from
Okay,
one
and it's from
program. Sorry.
not only that, it's from no, you're right. You're right to be mad about it. But it's from a page where they're advertising jobs and the jobs, like job postings, right? It's a whole mix of things. Some of them are we want somebody to teach like anthropology and social sciences and things, researching like indigenous cultures and practices and history. Great. Yes, some things which are the ones that he really wanted to laugh at are they have things called like indigenous data science and indigenous computer science, and when I looked into that I got so excited because what it is teaching computer science using indigenous pedagogical theory. How cool is that?
Yeah.
But he's mad about it, right? And then they wanted some admin jobs for like student service programs like a study center where they have like LSAT training and stuff. Like they just, but that's the thing is you can sort of slander it by being very vague about it and be like, oh, it's other ways. Oh my God,
And
navel
some
gazing or
major research Canadian university, not university's department or something
no,
like that, right? This is it's just all so ironic to me because it also doesn't allow us to even critique ourselves when we're doing this because these
yeah,
folks are saying new ways of knowing as opposed to what has been mandated by the heterogeneous, I mean sorry, the homogenous or kind of dominant society, but the ways that they're talking about is bringing back indigenous things from before those ways of
right.
knowing, right? And so I
I
feel like, ironically, they should put on their page embracing old ways of doing things.
right. Yeah. Well, yeah, but like what's wonderful about it too is that it acknowledges that like indigenous people continue to exist and continue to
Right.
develop um
That is very
techniques.
true.
So I love that. But yeah, so what happens there is he's using it to pump up his next book, which is called Suicidal Empathy. So we could have like a whole thing about how like, oh, empathy is communism and it's gonna kill us. We talked to Ina about the idea that like being peaceful and empathetic is why
Right.
Europe is being overtaken by like the Muslim hordes, right?
I have so many questions. Is Gad
Yeah.
single? Does he live on a boat by himself? Does he not socialize with any human beings?
I think he has a wife because he told a story once about his wife getting
That poor
afraid.
lady.
No, I think
Poor woman.
because she went to a coffee shop and saw somebody with a nose piercing and blue hair and got really scared. And that was a story that he told once because she wasn't sure if that person had they them pronouns or not. And she was like,
Okay,
if I
never
do it
mind.
wrong, scream at me, which is like, order your coffee, lady.
Yeah,
Like,
why are you worried about this other person? I
Right.
guess the reason why I say that is because how are you to survive as a human, even at the basic? Let's get back to that conversation about your most basic, the most basic needs that you have.
Mhm.
You do that in community. You don't survive without parents
Right.
that make sure you live for the first couple of years of your life. You don't survive
Right.
without other people you're interacting with to get jobs in this particular society.
Mhm.
You don't you literally just don't survive on your own. So to make something that attacks empathy or the ability to get along with other human beings
Yeah.
seems wild to me.
How you get into a situation where buying coffee is like an ordeal.
It's terrifying, right?
We kind of, I think that, and I don't mean to get too abstract for a second here, but it feels to me as though that with all of our technological innovations, that it to some degree has empowered some people to feel as though they don't need others. Because throughout all of our daily lives, traditionally, we would have had to have been interacting with others. We would have had to have been being kind and being considerate of other people's circumstances and how they function. And now you can do self checkout, which I hate, and you can call ahead and you can order your thing before you even get there and just pick it up. You don't have to say
We
anyone.
have rampant agoraphobia because
I
people
know
are not interacting with each other.
I do
Right.
get my groceries by curbside pickup. I do, but it's because I have
You are a
little
mom.
kids.
Yeah, I was like, you are
You're
a
a
mom.
mom.
These are
You're
just
a
tools
mom.
for you
It's different.
at this point. But I mean, I think about this all the time. I'm in the process, we talked about my academic projects, but at the same time, I have a personal project. I'm building a mini sustainable farm and a guest house where I will invite folks, families, individual families, to come and learn with me how to create their own, backyard or small spaced sustainable farms to feed themselves. Now, are they going to try to stop me from doing this? 100%, right? Because that goes into the systems of how we get our food and all of these kinds of things
Sure.
that cause issues. However, the idea that one could make food for themselves by themselves is like impossible. So the idea that you can
Right.
survive by yourself is
Right.
like
I
crazy
can
to
grow
me.
a few cucumbers, okay, but I can't like do a whole, balanced meal every day for my family by myself.
You probably have scurvy real quick though.
Oh,
Right.
there's no way. I've never made a lemon tree live. I've never survived. Like they don't survive me.
We have lost our understanding of what I generally term as the micro functions of society. So we know that uh, corn grows in the ground, and then we know that it appears in the grocery store for 99 cents an ear, right? But we
Yeah,
have lost a conception of all the other people that have to be a part of this circumstance for us to be able to have corn. And it's like this for every single thing. And I think that you
every
see
product.
this every product, every service, literally everything. It allows for us this luxury of being able to be a linguist or a historian or any of these other things because we're not worried about tilling the soil.
And this brings us
Living
back
the
to
life of the
capitalism, though. It allows some of us, right? Those of us, those small percentage of us that are coming from these
Right.
contexts, that are relying on the labor or the lots of people that are doing it that are
Yeah.
out of our sight, out of our vision line. So then it brings us back to this idea of the box. If we can't see what's outside of that box,
yeah.
then we're
Right.
not able
Yeah.
to kind of know any truth.
Yeah.
Truths.
We don't know what anything is really worth, and we don't know what it took to make them, and we don't know what the life of the person is like who helped, or the many people along the chain that brought us the corn
And then we
or
don't
whatever.
care because of it.
Yeah.
Because we don't know, we then end up
They're
not
not real
caring.
people to us,
And
right?
then
Yeah.
we can argue for the uselessness of empathy.
And then we can be like, well, they don't even speak the same Spanish as we do, right?
Well,
Why
why
should we be empathetic towards them?
they can't even figure out Spanish.
Can't even figure it out. They've been speaking it for centuries.
And they still don't have it?
Uh,
Good, very good.
and
Love
here
that.
we are.
Yeah, we are. not knowing where our corn came from and not appreciating linguistic diversity. It's all the same thing.
Right.
Good. Okay.
That's what you
So,
get here on Half the Answer.
is that what we get?
We hit it.
Yeah,
We hit half of it at least.
we got real dangerously close to Marxism. You guys were gonna have to pull it right back. Okay. That's Marx and alienation and all of that was just like right at the surface there, almost happening. And the leftist takeover of the universities has been total and unforgiving and unrelenting, as we can tell, because sometimes professors are told that they are wrong, and that's the end of that.
It always cracks me up that too. I live in Tennessee, and I'm surrounded by this kind of rich tapestry of a big land grant institution that is like a research institution that's got an endowment, is doing these things. And then these smaller Christian or community colleges and things like that that are doing wonderful jobs educating these students who I then get to interact with in different ways. And the idea that, one, people don't believe in education anymore, right? And that why do we even need these things? People don't even trust education anymore is like a myth that is connected to these like larger elite institutions that are showing by their actions that they are clearly not being taken over by anything leftist or right. And so the idea, for me, like in scholarship, not as a human being, in scholarship, I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, this is great fodder because this is showing exactly how the process works, right? This is exactly how a myth constructs an ideology. As a human being, I'm like,
Frightening. Well, yeah. So one thing that I'm always struck by is that like the people who say that they are fighting for academic freedom and rigor and like merit are constantly asking me to read these reports that are based on questionnaires that say they're like, oh yeah, like people don't believe in school anymore, like they don't like higher ed anymore. And then if you look at those questionnaire items, it makes you want to throw up. It's so bad because they're always like poisoning the well is one of the main sins of those questions, because they will seed you the answer they want you to give before they ask the question. Priming problems everywhere, right? And also like just poorly worded items that just feel like they're designed to get a certain response, because all of these guys, they work for organizations whose only like raison d'etre is that they're here to address a crisis of higher education and merit and rigor. So like it's just, they're like a snake eating its tail here. Just like, we're going to create the report and then we're going to respond to the report and then we're going to use the report to get our funding so that we can do more work and make more reports.
Absolutely.
not to bring in and also, I'm not going to lie. So now they're bringing in generative AI to also write the reports, and that feeds off of things that already exist. And so if it feeds itself things that exist that are not constructed of, it's like it's the same thing. So it's technology mirroring life.
Yeah. Oh man, people using technology to
We
do
even
things
get into technology. This is like a whole other podcast. Like if you guys want to invite me back to talk.
Yeah, I was going to say,
obviously,
we're at 56 minutes, ma'am. We cannot do that.
I know. I was like, invite me back. I have a whole paper on accent altering technology, but it is.
I want to hear about that. Yeah,
Professor, you gotta come back. There's no other option.
I mean, truly, literally, anytime you write something and you want to talk about it, you can just email me. Okay, so yeah, right. The woke takeover, very funny, very silly. However, it has created a situation where now we are experiencing essentially the hostage taking of universities, right? So it's happened to Columbia, it's happened to Harvard. Yeah. Where so you have to create this myth of the woke takeover in order to legitimize and justify taking these extreme measures, removing the funding and demanding the removal of certain faculty in certain departments and increasing police presence on the campus, and making harsher penalties. And then, also just kidnapping people off the street, apparently, and sending them
The
to,
camps.
it's Louisiana now, but they're
The
hoping to send
camps.
them to El
Yeah.
Salvador for sure. Yeah, to camps, to work camps, to these,
Barbarism.
yeah, which we already functionally have slavery in our prisons in the US, but the El Salvador situation is like, up to 1,000. It's turbocharged. So the other thing that you have to do, though, it's not just about creating a situation where there's like a woke orthodoxy in the schools. That's your story. But also it's about dehumanizing, I think, the academics that perform it, right?
Right.
Because and it's back to the failure to see the humans that give us our food. We also are failing to see the humans that give us our academic output, right? And so to just create this boogeyman of like, this is a monster. They're like gobbling up all your university funds to do me search and to talk about their lived experience and to do frivolous stuff. And they're teaching your kids to be Marxists. And that's why we have to punish them. It gives us a permission structure, right? It makes it feel
Right, right,
okay.
right, right.
So
And
harsh.
I think that, like I said, almost everything I do thinking about it within some sort of socio-historic moment or context. You cannot like forget the past while you're looking at what's going on in the
1000%.
present. Like, and so it's exactly what you're saying. The colonial format needed capitalism required the dehumanization of individuals in order
Yeah.
for it to function, in order for it to proliferate, in order for it to grow. And so even when potential people might want to slow down the proliferation of capitalism and its structures, the ideas and all the concepts that were used to bolster to bolster it and to make it grow, those ones are hard fought, right? And so it's very difficult to lose the ideological underpinnings of a structure,
Yeah.
even as we see things come to start to crumble around us, right? Even as we
Right.
start to see the system crumble, the idea, and then that is also the same tools that folks rely on because those are the ones that they've had, right?
Yeah.
To keep it going, to grow it, right? So they're like
Right.
doubling down. So we see the strongest defense of capitalism towards the end of it. Towards we see the strongest defense of things
You
as
gotta hold
they're
on
starting.
tighter.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that we can do as people who talk and write as our jobs is just remind people of the humanity of every person, right?
Yeah,
And also, we don't have to accept the sort of slander of the concepts that we like because somebody else doesn't like them, right? That's not how
yeah,
it works. We get to keep doing the research we want to do. We get to keep talking about colonialism, even though some people think it's stupid, because like, how can you not talk about colonialism when the president of our country is actively trying to annex other countries,
right.
Right.
right? And is using other countries like El Salvador as places where he can store and
Create
torment
prison colonies.
people. Yeah, the idea that like we as one country can be like, that country, we're gonna put them in your camp, like that's absolutely out of control for me.
Right. And
Yeah.
the
More than
idea that we
anything else.
exist as a country that gets to put boundaries and borders around it and use
I mean,
violence, right? Use
that's
violence
its
to
whole
protect
that's
those
its whole
from it.
ideology on its own, right? Is that like
Right.
Yeah.
you can have a border that you enforce with guns
But
and jail and police.
I really appreciate the way that you are, wrapping up this conversation as I just flew back 2 days ago from our large conference in applied linguistics, where I was invited to organize a colloquium around kind of relational accountability and these ideas within and the research that we're doing. And organically, without me prompting the people on my panel, the conversation, the theme, the through line was reinscribing humanity for certain languages and language practices in the varying spaces that we were talking about them in. So, in entertainment and media, in education, in medical and healthcare professions, in all of these kinds of spaces, the idea is to use this work to reinscribe humanity and to
Nice.
recenter the focus on
Yeah.
human
Insist on
beings, and to
Yes.
insist that we refocus on human beings and their basic needs, right? And
Right.
what it means for people to have their basic needs met is systems that work better, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming to speak to us and to sort of handle some of the various slanders that get lobbed at linguists and humanities scholars and scholars in general. This was really, really nice, and I hope
Wonderful.
we can have you back.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Trent and Caitlin. I really appreciate being here.
Oh man, this is going to be a good one.
It's going to be a great one. Well, after such a wonderful discussion with Professor Aris, well, we're left with only one conclusion, that understanding a question is half of an answer.
That's
And
all you can say, really.
we hope all of our listeners have a wonderful rest of their day, and we'll catch them real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.